5 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. You're just in time for our first conversation where we're talking about leadership as public trust. Is Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya shaping who we elect. But before we get into that, I want to take us through the front pages of our local dailies and see what has been reported. And I'm starting with the Daily Nation. 68 billion cash crisis cripples counties. The law requires that disbursements be made by the 15th of every month. Governors say Treasury has not wired funds for 2 months, warning that devolved units struggling to pay salaries on suppliers and now relying on bank loans risk shutdown, disrupting hospitals and schools. However, CS John Mbadi insists there's no crisis. That story is told on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. Turkana has lowest turnout. Mandera tops in grade 10 admissions. Turkana has the least number of students who have reported to grade 10, as the number of learners enrolled in senior schools rose to over 831,000, according to the Ministry of Education. That story is told on page 7 of the Daily Nation. Ahmed Nasir backs down in fight with Supreme Court judges. The Supreme Court judges are reviewing a fresh application seeking to lift their ban on senior counsel Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi from appearing before them. That story is told on page 2 of the Daily Nation. Shakahola confession, first suspect pleads guilty. Story told on page 3. Hospitals face 6 months SHA pay delays. That story is told in detail on page 10 of the Daily Nation. Now moving over to the Standard. Wetangula questioned while police insist the car crash that killed former Lugari MP Cyrus Jirongo was an accident. Detectives have already questioned more than 20 people, including Speaker Moses Wetangula, as they dig into the final hours of a death that refuses to go away. As investigators piece together timelines and forensic evidence, politicians remain unconvinced, openly questioning the official narrative and demanding answers to what they insist are troubling inconsistencies. That story is told in detail on page 4 of the Standard. And finally, on the front page of the Star newspaper, Oburu convenes mega Luo meet amid family war. Unlist one that moves by Raila's families could hurt Ruto's chances. That story is told on page 4 and 5 of the Star newspaper. How Ruto moves have jolted Gachagua to camp in Mount Kenya for 60 days. That story is told on page 6 of the Star newspaper. Court halts building of Ngong-Riruta railway line. High Court has temporarily halted construction of the proposed Ngong-Riruta railway line after issuing interim conservatory orders against Kenya Railways and several state agencies, pending the hearing of a petition filed by Busia Senator Okia Omtata. That story is told on page 3 of the Star newspaper. Former KCSE exam giants that do not roar anymore. That story is told on page 10. And finally, Museveni victory was created by AI algorithm. That is according to Kenya Human Rights Commission. That story is told on page 2 of the Star newspaper. Read that story on page 2 of the Star newspaper. That is what is captured on the front page of our local dailies. And now I want us to delve into our today's conversation, where we are exploring matters to do with Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And the topic today is leadership as public trust. Is Chapter 6 shaping who we elect? And in studio, joined on my far left by Wakili Peter Wasaga, who is an advocate of the High Court. Good morning and welcome to Good Morning Kenya.
Good morning, Migwi. Good morning, Kenya.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes.
To talk and to dissect on this very important chapter in the Constitution.
Yes.
Looking forward to the discussion.
And Dr. Murithi Ndegwa, OGW, who is a leadership expert. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mike, and good morning, Kenya. I'm happy to be in this discourse of public trust in leadership.
Karibu sana. And the Shuja, Kevin Osido, OGW, who is an executive director of County Governance Watch. Always a pleasure to have you on Good Morning Kenya, sir.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure as well, double M. That's Mike Migwi.
Yes, so actually it's triple M.
Oh, wow, you're much more blessed than I thought. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes, karibu sana. You know, when you look at chapter 6 of the Constitution, as we get into this conversation, it talks about leadership and integrity. And looking at the Constitution itself, it's one of the most revolutionary constitutions that we have. And Chapter 6 does stand out because it de-emphasizes power and instead puts public office as a trust that must be exercised with humility, with accountability, and with dignity. Let me start with you, Wakili, from your perspective. And going by what we are asking, do we really, has this constitution or this chapter shaped who we elect?
Thank you so much. And one, I must appreciate the fact that the framers of the Constitution saw it wise to have Chapter 6 of the Constitution. It has so many articles that we may dissect from all the way from 73 to 80.
Yes.
And the establishment of various commissions, including ethics and anti-corruption, and the directive that the Constitution gave to the National Assembly to enact a legislation that would also give, that will give effect to Chapter 6 of the Constitution, that is the Leadership and Integrity Act number 19 of 2012. And looking at that, one, it was a step on the right direction. And it has, in one way or the other, shaped how we view leadership. But then the question is now looking at the writings, the Constitution, and the constitutionalism. There is one, it's one thing to enact and to create very good articles regarding a particular subject. And it's another thing to realize that provision. And now I think the best we can do right now is to look at how far we've gone and how far this chapter has been realized. On my way I've been reflecting, on my way to this place I've been reflecting and comparing Kenya and other East African countries. And I was just looking at the social media, and so a leader who is holding a very senior position in a neighboring country, boasting and chest thumping of killing an opponent's, of killing 22 or 21, I don't know, I think it was 22, and also promising to kill a presidential candidate. And that really shook me. And in defining now leadership, I look at now the Leadership and Integrity Act. One of the objectives of the Leadership and Integrity Act, which actually gives effect to the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, is the abiding to the rule of law, or abiding by the rule of law, respect of human rights, respect to the national values and principles of governance under Article 10 of the Constitution, openness, accountable, honesty, being responsible in your private and public life. And now when you look at all these things, vis-a-vis the appointing authorities, number one, on the one aspect, and also the appointing mandate that has been given to the public by a dint of the sovereignty of the people, under Article 1 of the Constitution. Do we really look at the integrity of the people we elect? Or do we elect people based on their based on the parties they come from, the tribes, and perhaps their influence? many a times we elect not based on the leadership and integrity, but we elect based on the influence and the alignment of a particular leader. We've seen leaders with questionable academic papers being elected to office. We've seen leadership with questionable characters being elected to office. And also, we also have to look at it vis-a-vis the commission, that is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, that has been formed to oversee the Leadership and Integrity Act. Of course, there are documents that we are required with. When you get to be employed, you are expected to have clearance from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption. But is it done on merit? Is it done based on the actual conduct of those leaders? Or is it influenced by some other people? That is why we have leaders who they don't meet the academic qualifications, they have corruption cases, or perhaps they have committed certain heinous acts, which in the breadth of Chapter 6 and the Leadership and Integrity Act, they should not even hold positions, but yet they still hold this position. It is the political interference with the commissions that are mandated to check, and it's also political bad manners by the electorates who, instead of looking at the integrity of leaders, we look at what we get in the long run in terms of the, politics of tokenism.
Politics of tokenism.
Yes.
That is something that actually we have been talking about for quite some time. But when you look at integrity, Daktari, and how it's envisioned within Chapter 6 of the Constitution, it's one of the key things that comes out. But then again, my question to you is, can we determine as to how or what integrity looks like when we talk about it, and based on the kind of a leader that we want to elect?
Thank you very much, Mike. I think I just want to build a little bit on what Wakili has said.
Yes.
And if you look at basically the Chapter 6 that Wakili was talking about, especially Section 73.2, I think it talks so much about the guiding principles of a leader, or what leadership is all about. Now, if you look at that particular section closely, it talks about selection on the basis of competence and capability,
yes,
and suitability.
Yes.
And then you go further to talk about objectivity and impartiality in terms of decision making, not influenced by aspects like nepotism and the likes. And it talks so much also about selfless service. But I think the main thing, and I think he's alluded to that very well, and he's articulated that very well, is that the reality on the ground. And then questions start arising, especially when you look at now the current situation in terms of the statistics. And if you look at the statistics on the basis of corruption, perception, and so on and so forth, we see, for example, in the year 2024, I think Kenya had a score of about 32%, where 0 is most corrupt and 100% is very clean. And the question then we ask ourselves is that, why then, with all these institutions, with Chapter 6 in place, why then do we have corruption perception index, for example, increasing as opposed to decreasing? Why then are we also, when you look at the average and comparing with other countries within East Africa, why is it that we are lower, and we are lower than the global average? Because I think the global average was about 43%. The East African average is about 33%. And what also struck me is that when you look at the amount that was talked about in terms of bribes,
yes,
rising from about 3,700 to about 4,800 or 4,900. So there's clearly a disconnect between having the institutions, having the Chapter 6, and what is the reality on the ground. And I think that's a question then we need to ask. Is it a question of we are electing the wrong leaders, or is it that implementation has a challenge? I think there's a series of questions that we need to ask, because there's no reason why Chapter 6 can be so well articulated. And I think the drafter did a very good job. And then we come and find on the ground, things are different.
You know, Daktari has said something about implementation, Osido. And do we have is it a problem when you look at the implementation architecture, especially when it comes to Chapter 6, failing to achieve the intended effect?
A very good question, Mike. And insofar as I am concerned, what really bothers us is bare impunity. That you actually know what you're supposed to do. You understand what the law says, and in this country we like saying the law is very clear. So indeed it is very clear. But if it is very clear, why can't we therefore, feel and touch that clarity?
Yes.
And if you look at the implementation aspects, as my co-panelists have rightfully said, the Constitution even gives very clear guidelines around how implementation of Chapter 6 is supposed to be done. So that beyond the Articles 73 all the way to 80,
Yes.
you also have other supporting legislations. For example, you have things like Leadership and Integrity Act of 2012,
Yes.
which therefore defines how the aspects of leadership and integrity in Chapter 6 are therefore supposed to be adjudicated. So it addresses the operationalization aspects, which therefore border on implementation, which means that, for example, it sets the code of conduct for state and public officers. So the moment you become a state officer, a public officer, and the Constitution again in Article 260J, basically Article 260 defines who these people are. Why don't we therefore clearly operationalize and implement what what Chapter 6 therefore says? It goes further to also look at the requirements when it comes to issues around assets and liabilities, declarations. And in this country, again, we like talking about something called asset declaration for public officers, that when you are running for office or when you are being vetted, and we normally hear parliamentarians asking them, so what is your worth? How much do you worth? What do you own? The Constitution has properly given an implementation aspect in terms of how that is supposed to be done. But why are we not so deliberate to be able to look at those kind of declarations? It goes further to look at implementations around provisions on sanctions for ethical breaches, so that when you breach the ethical terms, the expectations of why Kenyans thought that we need to have an article of the Constitution to define what ethics is. And if you go against the parameters of what we think is integrity and is ethics, then there are things that are supposed to be done, to be able to provide those sanctions. And we are not seeing those sanctions being implemented insofar as what the spirit of the Constitution is concerned. Of course, the second implementation aspect is a Public Officers Ethics Act of 2003. So that when you are a public officer, and you're operating within the precepts of government, then you know very well that this is supposed to govern your behavior. And I know that Kenyans remember that we once had, an officer of the court who said you should know people, and she was like pinching somebody's ear, the nose. And that is how she lost the job, because Kenyans felt that there is a way in which you are supposed to behave when you are a public officer. But in this country, we also know that there are members who are called honorable members, but their behavior is so dishonorable that you sometimes ask yourself, so what ethics therefore governs the ethical behavior of these public officers? So therefore, in terms of implementing Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity, the Public Officers Ethics Act therefore breaks down clearly what we must be able to do, including aspects of abuse of public resources. So that when Kenyans suspect that you have stolen public funds, there's a way in which that matter is supposed to be reported. And when it is reported, now I hear there is something called NYS 3. What therefore happened to NYS 1? What happened to NYS 2? And that now we have NYS 3. It is important that we operationalize the law and we implement it to the spirit and to the letter, so that what the expectation of Kenyans are is clear, and that what the letter, in terms of what we read in the law, is also very, very clear. Of course, the third implementation aspect my colleagues have talked about is Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act of 2011.
Yes.
And you look at this, Mike, and sometimes you get really disappointed because of the manner in which, one, the Commission's mandate is understood by the citizens. And sometimes we imagine that the Commission only exists for those who have stolen little monies, but that those who have gone beyond what we think is too much money, or what is otherwise called grand corruption, are protected by the law. Yet the mandate of the Commission is very, very clear around investigations of corruption and ethical violations, and what therefore need to happen the moment there is a whistleblower or there is a suspected theft by a public officer or even by anyone. So concerns around implementing enforcement aspects have been such a serious challenge to Kenyans, because the Commission will say, yeah, we have challenges to enforce the leadership and integrity standards around the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission mandate, because DCI does this. because we are relying on DPP to submit certain evidence, etc. So if you look at some of those weaknesses, then of course the implementation of the requirements of ethics and anti-corruption insofar as the expectation of the Constitution are largely, floundered. And I think as I finish on this, something that for us who are in devolution and in governance really bothers us is what we call the Public Finance Management Act, which is another aspect of implementation of what we are calling leadership and integrity, particularly at the county and even, when it comes to fiducious management of public resources. And this is one area that Kenyans interact with leadership and integrity almost on a daily basis. For example, right now we are talking about education, and that parents and families have serious challenges even to take their children to schools. But when you hear about certain resources that are supposed to be taken to these particular, certain schools in the name of capitation, you ask yourself, how come it is so difficult to explain where an X% of the total number of capitated budget has gone to?
Yeah.
Is it that we just lack fiscal discipline? Is it that we lack accountability in budgeting and expenditure? Or is it that insofar as implementing leadership and integrity, the oversight of national and county governments and even ministries, departments and agencies become so weak? So in terms of the question around implementation, the law again, as Kenyans say, and I quote, is very clear. But I think the impunity and just lack of, bare minimum political goodwill. And the president, I think, has been very categorical around this, that now we even have a law on witness protection. We have a law, therefore, that also guides cases on, corruption. And I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to adjudicate over corruption cases within a very small minimum time, so that when somebody is being elected and is being vetted as a governor, say, for example, Kevin Osido to run for governor, say, a county, and there is an X case, that case should not lead me into the election up to the next election. Kenya should begin to look at implementation aspects, therefore, that make it so easy for Kenyans to get the right questions, the right answers for the right questions when it comes to aspects of leadership and integrity.
Very important aspects, because you are touching on vetting, enforcement, and even implementation. And Daktari, from what Osido has said, is it that the vetting is weak and the enforcement or implementation political?
Thank you very much, Mike. I think Osido has clearly articulated the fact that there are institutions that are there to do the job. But if you still go back to 73.2, it talks about selfless service solely based on public interest. Demonstrated by what? By honesty, by integrity in execution of the duties, and also it talks about declaration of interest, personal interest, and discipline and commitment in terms of delivering the public service. So I would say that from the first perspective, it touches on you as an individual. Are you alive to the fact that you are governed by Chapter 6? And therefore, even before we talk about the structures that are in place, the bodies that are in place, as an individual, are you delivering what you committed to do? And I think he said something also very important in the sense that before you take up a public office, and you have a case, that case should be adjudicated long before you take up that public office. Not to wait until you've gone round the cycle and then that's when things are being done. So I think from a personal perspective, I would say the first and foremost thing is that the Constitution was very clear in terms of selfless service by an individual. And if we are all alive to the fact that we need to give that selfless service so that we are judging ourselves even before we are judged by the public, we are judged by these other institutions, then certainly there are some things that we will not be seeing, especially when it comes to plundering of national resources, when it comes to plundering of resources that, or when it comes to plundering resources or misusing powers that have been bestowed onto you. The second thing is, we are not all the same. So there are those who will obviously decide, you know what, I want to sanitize my position, I want to sanitize whatever I may have gotten. So they go into the system, they get into power, into positions of power. Now, he's also articulated very well that the implementation or the execution by some of these bodies, perhaps, maybe there's a bit of a challenge, because why is it that you'd vet somebody, allow them to go through the process, and you say they're okay, then later you hear scandals or cans of worms being opened, that this person did this person did that, yet that information is readily available, and it's also known to the public. So it's a question of an individual and also the aspect of implementation and execution by some of these bodies, in my view. And I think thirdly also is, they always say where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly.
And so if there's a determination to implement Chapter 6 to the dot, certainly it would be there. We've seen many countries that started off on the wrong footing, or even that were even worse than ourselves. But because of that resolve, you see matters being taken to a level whereby somebody feels that I am completely discouraged to even touch anything from the public. And if that was to happen, then certainly would find our country going to a much better, a much higher level.
Indeed.
Mike, just to add on to something,
do that. Let's do that once we come from this short break.
Yeah.
Yes. We're going for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. You're watching The Viewpoint, and we are talking about leadership and integrity as envisioned within Chapter 6 of the Constitution. Before we went on a break, Dr. was saying, did execute his point, and you wanted to contribute to it.
To add on to something, and it's a story about Singapore.
Yes.
Now that we are on a trajectory towards Singapore, and one of the successes that made Singapore become a darling, and now even a success story that countries like ours, Kenya, can be able to emulate many years despite us being on a similar pedestal, was there, basically zero tolerance to corruption.
Yes.
And a story is told of the former Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, that when one of the cabinet ministers was just informed that we have a suspected case of corruption and will be coming to visit your office. He tried reaching Lee Kuan Yew, and of course Lee Kuan Yew was available, but he said, I'm not available for that kind of a discussion. If you have a suspected case on corruption, you know what Singapore and Singaporeans stand for. Go finish your issue, and I'm still here in this country. There's nowhere I am going to.
Yeah.
And if you look at Kenya, if we are to get to that pedestal of Singapore, we must agree that we will be able to exercise political goodwill, that nobody will be protected from the highest office. Whether you are entrepreneurs, whether you are, the leaders of the political parties, however much investment you give to these parties. And it's because, Lee Kuan Yew allowed investigations to proceed fully, independently, and publicly, because in some of them that had a lot of public interest, they were actually being done in open spaces.
Yes.
Kenya, we have to move to that level where we move beyond political loyalty issues, seniority, personal interest, and friendship contribution to, how whatever you've stolen goes back to other people's pockets, what otherwise we locally call here kickbacks. So for us to get to the Singapore that is Singapore, of course Kenya and Singapore is incomparable in many, many ways, but there are good things that we can be able to learn from Singapore, such as zero tolerance to corruption. Yeah.
Wakili, there is reality on the ground and what is envisioned in the Constitution, especially when it comes to Chapter 6. And expectations is that it's supposed to clean up politics, enhance ethical governance and accountability, and even bar corrupt people or people with questionable integrity issues from contesting or ascending to public office. But then again, from your perspective, why do we see so many leaders with questionable integrity vie for this position or get appointments to these offices, yet they win and they get to those offices, yes, they have questionable integrity issues?
Thank you. Allow me to weigh in on what my good brother Daktari and Osido has mentioned on the implementation.
Yes.
And in so doing, I'll be answering your question. When you look at Section 4 of the Leadership and Integrity Act,
yes,
it provides for the implementation of the Act. And first in the hierarchy is that every person has the responsibility of implementing the provisions of this Act. Then number 2 is the Commission. And the Commission can use public entities, for example, the police, the DCI, to implement this Act. And of course, the independent bodies, other independent bodies. And then number 3, if these entities are not able to carry out the job, then the Act also mandates them to make an application before a high court for appropriate orders requiring that public entity to comply. So you see, there is a hierarchy. First in the hierarchy is the people. You cannot be blaming the leaders, yet these leaders are also people who are elected by the people, who are vetted by the people, either directly or indirectly. When leaders are, for example, state officers and public officers appear before the National Assembly, they do so with the blessings of the people, because it is this it's the citizens who actually elected these leaders. But even looking at it from a very basic point of view, as Migwi, on your way to the studios, you're very late, and you meet a police officer and you've actually committed a traffic offense, what will be the best thing you'll do? Would you allow yourself to go through the court process, or just give a bribe of 1,000 shillings and come here because of convenient? That is what many people do. The sin of facilitation everywhere. Facilitation in courts, facilitation to take your, to even get an ID, facilitation to even jump the line, facilitation to do everything. So these are the people that maybe this facilitation could has not so much shown itself, and it might not have been captured by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, or maybe you could have not been charged. You may have not been charged for a particular offense, but it's growing, it's brewing in you, so that when you are elected in a leadership position, you could be Migwi as you are, or Osido as he is, and everyone here, but then there is some elements of corruption in you, so that when you get to that position, you change. Leadership actually exposes you. It reveals who you are. So there are so many corrupt individuals who are not corrupt on the face value, but when given responsibilities, they are very corrupt. So if you want to deal with the menace of corruption, if you want to implement the Leadership and Integrity Act, the ball, the responsibility starts with you and myself, without really, before you move to the other individuals whom we always blame, the leaders, the president, the prime minister, and so forth. Number 2, it's also very important for us to look at Section 11 of the same Act. Section 11 talks about professionalism. And it says that a state officer shall carry out duties in the office in a manner that maintains public confidence. There are offices that we all know, and year in, year out, when surveys are brought and we are able to see, there are certain institutions that they will lead always, and nothing is done about it. So it's something that confidentially we cannot really, we cannot put our trust in those offices. It's within the public domain, and nothing can be done about that. The other thing that we also have to look at is also the treat members of the public and the public officers with courtesy and respect. Do we treat do we treat our electorates with respect? For example, the rule of law. You heard about the shoot to kill, or shoot to kill, and everything that you've had in the recent past. The extrajudicial killings, the cover-ups, like the other one that was here at the Central Police Station. The leaders who are corrupt, the moment they become politically correct, they are sanitized. They are those who have been charged and found culpable, and actually they are on appeal. Of course, from that point you are guilty. Already you are now fighting to be innocent. But still, the same electorates have given them the mandate to represent them. A classic example is a member of parliament who was found guilty of misappropriation. And yet this person, what he did was to simply cross over. And we hear very less about the case. Of course, there is also the presumption of innocence. That is why it's also very difficult to deal with this menace, because everyone is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Because, of course, the manners of the police and the manners of the public institution, sometimes when you want to settle your own political scores or you want to settle your own vendetta, what you'll do is to come up with trumped up charges, charge someone in court, they are taken through the trial process, which is not very easy, it's very hectic. By the time you complete and you prove yourself, and the court proves you innocent based on your evidence, you shall have suffered irreparable harm. And that is what the law envisages, that we are not going to condemn you unheard. We must give you all the benefits of doubt. We must give you the benefit of being first taken through the trial process and presumed innocent. Okay. So that is why we cannot based on a suspicion or based on an offense that you've been charged with, or based on a charge, we cannot buy you from assuming a public office. But then it goes again back to the public, to the electorates. Who are we electing? For example, let me take you back. In 2022, Migwi, it was very clear there was a court case ongoing, touching on the then deputy president. It was all over. But still, when the deputy president ascended to office, immediately we saw these cases being dropped. And what was the excuse? That these were political charges. And we all believe that they were all political charges. And so if we are going to look at everything from a political point of view, then we are fighting a losing battle.
Okay. Daktari, you know, we are talking about this, and to some extent, based on what Wakili has said, I feel like the people have a responsibility in as far as this chapter is concerned. And from your perspective, what is that responsibility?
Thank you very much, Mike. I think Wakili has articulated very well, and there's one comment that he made, and he said, if today, Mike, you're brought into an office that has a lot of goodies and so on, it's very likely that one may engage in the gravy train. So it's a question of me or you as an individual. What are your morals? What is your credibility index? And I think the question that you've raised in regard, or trying to answer that question, is that the public has a very clear duty, in the sense that that chapter 6 talks so much about selfless service. It talks so much about commitment to service and discipline and honesty in the execution of duties. Now, the question we should be asking ourselves is that even as you're given that public office, because it's not yours, it's a public office that you've been given in terms of running the show, do you have that commitment? Do you have that selfless service? Do you discharge your duties in a way that has integrity and that there is honesty? And the question then that comes in is that if you don't do that, then the mechanisms that he talked about are put in place. That's one. Number two, he mentioned so much about the electorate. A lot of times in elections we see candidates coming in, some very credible, and some not so credible. Some have cases, some don't have cases. But very often we see people ganging up and electing people who have credibility questions or integrity questions, simply because they've been given a little money and they don't know that that money actually they are being bribed with perhaps even came from the public coffers. So even as an electorate, we have a responsibility to ensure that the people that we are electing are people of credibility and people of integrity. And the third thing I think that comes in very well is that all these things are interconnected. We cannot separate the people from the leaders. Neither can we separate the leaders from the people. Neither can we separate the leaders, the people, and the institutions that have been created. So to me, it's like a triangle. There's the people, there are the people in leadership, there's also the bodies that have been put in place to ensure that there's zero corruption, and right in the middle of that triangle, there's the people. So the question then that comes in is, how do we then integrate all these three aspects, or even all these forces, so that we ensure that Kenya moves from where it is to a better place? Because we all agree, clearly, that there's a lot that goes on that is not right. We also agree, and we see a lot of reports coming, especially from the government bodies, like Kenya National Accounting Office, KENAU. The reports coming in, year out, about certain institutions, about certain bodies where corruption is, where they cannot explain about resources that have been misappropriated, resources that have been bestowed onto them. So I think it's a question of looking at the holistic picture.
Yes.
But like they say, and I think Mike alluded to it, at the end of the day, the leadership plays a very critical role.
Osido, you know, the whole idea of this chapter, that is chapter 6 of the Constitution, was meant to be transformative. But then again, from a governance perspective, has it really changed how power is exercised in Kenya, or are we talking about, it's a matter of how leadership is talked about?
Wow, that's a very interesting question, because you're bringing in the aspect of power and leadership, and sometimes it's very difficult to separate the two. Because, for example, you are given a flag because you are a leader that has power. So the flag is a symbol of power. Your vehicle has a siren and you have escort because you are a leader, and the siren is a symbol of power because you are a leader. So sometimes it becomes very difficult to separate the two, but you're actually right, because what we've not done very well as a country is to separate those two. So that the politicians are deemed to be more powerful because they wield seemingly too much power that they are also able to determine their own salaries and change it within a day. They are able to bring down a deputy president, a sitting deputy president, and goes impeached within just few days. They are able to, you know, decide a budget, even despite public participation concerns of Kenyans, and agree that this is what, you know, the country will have, even if Kenyans don't like it. So they have a lot of power. But if you look at the leadership aspects of those who wield so much power, then they are probably even quite lower in the ladder, because it's very difficult to get a number of our political leaders who are good leaders. And it is in this country that we have been told that if we are not very careful, we will have as many leaders who are wash-wash, or who are corrupt, or who are this, or who are that. But you see, now you cannot walk into a PP3 class, or I mean PP1, PP2, or a grade 7 class and tell them that we want to talk about leadership, and this is our symbol of a leader. And then you have somebody who is very corrupt, you know, as now the symbol of a leader of this country, or of this society, or of this community. And it reminds me of one of the schools I visited as I was trying to look for a school for my daughter. And in the board, they have so many photos of very many people, including President Barack Obama, President Uhuru Kenyatta, Mheshimiwa Raila Amolo Odinga, the late. I almost thought that my image was also going to be put there. So I asked them, but why do you have this board of, you know, images of people? Then they said, these are the people that we call legacy leaders. So it is a legacy poster. So you do something innovative, you do something creative, you do something transformational, and then your image is, they'll either Google the image, cut it, whether the children know about you or they don't. But what they are emphasizing is the spirit of leadership, the culture of leadership. So it is important, therefore, that when we talk about leadership and integrity, or integrity, the power that you have is not a license for you to do the ills. That you now want to, a list of people who have been vetted as judges, or as county chief officer, or as county CECs, the fact that your daughter or your kin is missing in the list because you have the power of the pen to scrap off people's names, so you will just do it because you have the power. That is not an exercise of integrity. Yes, you are the leader, you sit at the front, everybody, you know, salutes at you or to you, and you have the power, you know, to decide who gets recruited, or, you know, as we say in the village, written, or kuandikwa kazi. But that does not, the act you are doing is not an act of integrity. Yes, you have the power, but it is not the act of integrity. The fact that you have a siren and you are late, and the Osidos and everyone is in traffic and they are queuing, they are waiting, then you just show up, and because you are on a siren and you think you are going to move people around because you have the power of the siren, the act you are doing is good because you are the powerful one. But it is not an act of integrity. And that is why, in addition to the actions of the citizens, like Daktari, you know, cleverly, you know, enumerated, Kenyans are now standing up to such people. And they are saying, you are driving on the wrong side of the road. Sorry, sir, but you will just have to wait here with us. Unless you are a police officer, or you are an ambulance, or there is a fire somewhere,
itabidi ungoje hapa na sisi.
Yes.
Because otherwise you have the power to make things easy for everybody so that we clap for you and we celebrate. But you are using, you know, the mere lack of integrity because of your power to break the law, to destroy things, to mess up things. And it goes further. We can give very many examples, even for, you know, our MCAs, our governors, people who are supposed to be in charge of healthcare, that you have the power to ensure that there are drugs in the health facility. But you choose not to use your power to put the budget and appropriate the resources so that Kenyans benefit out of the power that you have, but that this monies you'd rather go and misuse the money of the budget. It is not an act of integrity. Yes, you are the leader, you stand at the top, and we might not challenge you, we might not impeach you, because IEBC has not helped us to also have a mechanism to recall you at that point in time. The impeachment might again take a longer process if you are the governor.
Yeah.
But the acts that you are involving in are not acts of integrity. So it therefore becomes very, very important that power and leadership really cross-cut, especially when we are talking about integrity. Because there are people who are powerful, or rather powerless, but every day they are involving in acts of integrity that are changing people's lives.
Yes.
You know, like a matatu driver who chooses not to kata, he has very little power. He is driver to a matatu, but he has chosen to follow the law. They say traffic, you must not drive beyond 80, you know. So they will stay at 80 without interfering with the speed governor, because that is what the law has told us in this country. So your power might be limited, and you are the leader who is leading the bus, because the bus can only have one driver who is now the leader. But the act that you're involving in to just respect the law and to stay within the parameters of 80 is an act of integrity, as opposed to someone who has power and is already breaking that law. And as I finish Triple M, I've been asking in some quarters, particularly within the education sector, that we must begin to inculcate the culture of integrity. And now I am happy because the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, towards now almost 14 years,
yes,
an idea that we started many years ago while I was working at the youth agenda, when I was a Gen Z of those times, yeah? Now in schools, we have what we call integrity clubs.
Yes.
You know, we have clubs where when you register, like now, the last week, you know, grade 10s were being admitted, and in some schools I saw, some that I attended to, they even have tents where they have put banners written integrity club, so that if you want to be part of that club, you go in. And I moved into one of those tents and I asked them, so what do you do in this integrity club? And you can imagine a mechanism where the school even has an award mechanism, an opportunity to award the most integrity abiding student or learner in that school.
Yes.
And it's a practice that I believe that even as a country, and I know that some organizations like us in the civil society normally do these awards. But if you can strengthen it so that there is something that is attached to the impunity that you exude because you are more powerful, so you break the law and you go against you know, indicators of integrity, the punishment needs to be so dire and so stiff to be able to prevent the misbehavior of any other powerful people who may want to behave in that manner. You know, a friend of mine called Rispa from Assembly is actually telling me that the minister you are referring to, he actually committed suicide even before his case was ended, you know. Yeah. And you see, it's just because of the scare. What will the community think about me, that I have stolen this money, I'm going to court? Okay. So like Dr. was saying, personal attitude, how do we relate and how do we imagine that people are looking at us when we are going around our daily businesses?
You know,
Mike, please just allow me just to add one point onto what Mike has quite eloquently, Kevin Osido, what Kevin Osido has quite eloquently alluded to.
Yes.
He said something about power and leadership. And he also said something about, clearly, when you have been given that position of leadership, how do you utilize it? Or what is your role? And I think there's something that he has alluded to in terms of your role as a leader is to serve the people. Because you've been given that position, not as a permanent position, but in trust by the public. And if you've been given in trust by the public, or God has even placed you there, then clearly you know that it is not a position where you are supposed to be exuding power. You're supposed to be leading others on the basis of serving them. What's your other role? inspire people. You're not supposed to be inspiring people into corruption early.
Yeah.
You are to inspire people on the basis of reaching or attaining some certain objectives or goals that have been set for the country, the county, or even the organization. And the other one is you also have to deliver results. There are no two ways about it. You have to deliver the results. So I think that aspect of separating power and leadership is very critical, but it starts firstly with you realizing that you're in there on transit. You're not there on a permanent basis. You're not a permanent asset in that position or in that organization or in that county. You're there on the basis of delivering over a certain period of time, and your role therefore is to serve the people.
Indeed, indeed. My colleague, as we were talking about this, as we are making our introductions at the start of Good Morning Kenya, asked a very important question, and I think it's a good point to close. I'll ask that question as, and take that as your closing remarks. Who bears responsibility if we do not adhere to chapter 6? I take this as your closing remarks, and I'll start with you, Wakili.
Of course, the responsibility is on everyone. The consequences is also meted on everyone. You see, they say in the good book that the consequences of sin is death. Also, the consequences of corruption or lack of integrity and good leadership is the deterioration that we all see. Death in the economy, death in our morals, and even death in key government institutions. Migwi, you can attest to this. And if I asked you a very simple question, do you have confidence, for example, on the National Assembly and the Senate? For example, if there is a clear case of an impeachment of a governor that the Senate is to execute.
Okay.
As a member of the public, do you have confidence that the Senate will pass a clear and good sound verdict? The answer is close to negative, zero. Why? It's because there is a lot of mobilization.
Okay.
And this mobilization takes out the objectivity. And it brings about that aspect of leaning towards a given side of the warring parties. A classic example is the case of Kawira Mwangaza. I followed it through. It was one of the most, it was the saddest impeachment that I ever watched, because it was very clear that the reason as to why Kawira Mwangaza was being removed from office, and the same was sanctioned by the Senate, it's because she was not wanted, mainly by the leaders, not the electorates. The leaders who actually felt that Kawira Mwangaza did not deserve, perhaps because she was a woman. So what are the consequences? When we disobey the tenets of the Constitution, when with impunity we decide to go against the Constitution, the consequences are very clear. We will always come back to cry year in, year out, and elect the same leaders, and the economy will be where it is right now.
All right. Doctor, in the
very quickly, Mike, thank you very much. For me, I would look at it from this perspective. Your role in terms of Chapter 6, in terms of honesty and execution of your duties, and the whole aspect of discipline and commitment to service. I'd look at it, therefore, from me as an individual and you. I'd also look at it from the perspective of the electorate and also the leaders. And that threesome, if I put it that in quotes, of that triangle, every one person in that triangle has a role to play. As an individual, I'm obliged to think consciously even before I make a decision in terms of electing somebody. As an electorate, we also have an obligation in terms of the persons that you're going to be electing. And then as a leader, you have a role to realize that your role is to serve the people and to ensure that you do what appertains to the role that you've been given. It pains me so much when you see boards all over, in ministries, in parastatals. This is a corruption-free zone. And then the next minute you're seeing, can now report this ministry or this institution has done X, Y, Z. So it's upon all of us. But obviously, there is a greater responsibility that rests with the leader.
All right. Osido.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mike. And my short answer is that the responsibility rests on everyone. The only difference is that it rests at different levels and with totally different consequences. So that to the individual citizen, then the person has to make their own responsible choices, and that the consequences of those choices have to be borne by those individuals. But when you are exercising leadership in public trust or leadership as public trust, then the consequences are totally different, because you are being guided by the rule of law, and there are also higher moral and legal responsibility that you bear. And as we said earlier on, in Kenya, therefore, we have laws, we have policies, we have expectations that Kenyans have. And the long and short of it, therefore, is, in my view, that leaders that lack integrity would do wider damage that stays for generations and generations. So the long and short of it is the consequences of your actions as an individual are your own. But for the leader who is bearing public trust, it is much more wider and deeper. Deeper because if you take away resources that are supposed to build a road, then there are more people who are going to suffer. Right. If you take away resources for schools, or rather for education, there are more people and generations that are going to suffer. If you take resources that are supposed to ensure that counties have funds to be able to put drugs in health facilities, the ramifications are more dire and deeper. Yes. To other generations.
Indeed. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming to expound on matters to do with leadership and integrity as envisioned in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. That is Wakili Peter Wasaga, who is an advocate of the High Court, Dr. Muriithi Ndegwa, OGW, who is a leadership expert, and Kevin Osido, OGW, Executive Director, County Governance. Watch, this is where this conversation ends.